So as I've gotten older and more Christmases come and go, and as I've learned more, and I love history, so as I've studied more history, one of the things that I realized, maybe you've done this also, is I call it the seismic shift that occurred 2,000 years ago when Jesus was born into the world. Now, I'm not saying the world changed on that day as far as the world as you and I saw it, because the world continued to move forward as it always had, but there was this incredible shift or change when God sends his son into the world that is based on the promises that God had given, his intention that he would always come and rescue us, but our impatience and the difficulty that we have in waiting on that. But it was this enormous change. And the more you look at it, the more you look at cultures and the influence of Christianity and how Christianity grew through the years, I mean, the more and more you will realize how big, how significant that change was. One of the things I mentioned a couple of weeks ago is how the dating system changed, right? So all of a sudden the calendars changed, but that it didn't occur until maybe the 5th or 6th century that they actually made the change, or someone came up with the change. However, just to add to that, the world, as far as the European world and the bigger part of the world, really didn't change to BC and AD until maybe the 14th or the 15th century was when they made the shift. And especially the shift went on, you'll like this, when this new country called the United States of America pops up, and they already make the shift into saying BC and AD. And one of the things that's unusual is this new country called the United States. All of a sudden, Christianity is one of the hallmarks of what this new country is all about. I know new form of government. I know the Enlightenment. I know the industrial age comes in. There are all these things that make the United States even bigger on the stage of the world, but they're also known as sort of promoting or embodying Christianity. In fact, if you were to go anywhere in the world, maybe you go in the neighborhood and you would say, name the #1 country that you think is Christian, they would probably say what? America. So America hadn't even been around that long. You know, this next year we're going to celebrate how many years as a country? 250 years, our 250th anniversary. I know some couples that have been married that long. I mean, it's not that long. 250 years we're going to celebrate. And you look in relationship to the world and world events and things that happen, that's not very long. We're incredibly new at this, and yet incredibly powerful and incredibly influential. And I think that you know, and I know that you say, so that's, you know, maybe the United States is what promoted Christianity. I think it's probably the opposite. I think the United States kind of formed out of an idea, a different idea, and even the American idea, the Western idea of Christianity is in a lot of ways different than what you found for the longest time in Europe. It was a change. And change is difficult, isn't it? Change is difficult. I was asking you to pick your favorite Christmas decoration. One of the reasons I did is because this year it was my wife's idea. We have, for the first time, I know that some of you will probably leave the church over this, but we have a blow up in the front yard, Christmas decoration. We do, for the grandkids. There's a blow up there, and I resisted it. My resistance is, well, okay, I do resist change, but my resistance is, I know if we put this up and I have to go inflate it and put it out there, I'll also have to pack it back up and put it back away, you know, in a couple of weeks. And so I was, and just to let you know, because I want to be clear, you understand, my blow up there, as far as I know, there is no blow up nativity scene. Does anybody has one? I want to know. But you know, there is no blow up nativity scene. Mine is a monster truck with Santa hanging out the windows and some presents and for the grandkids. And I understand, and I don't even look at it because, no, I'm kidding. I like it also. It's kind of fun to watch it inflate in the evening and to deflate in the morning. But change occurs. It's okay. Down the street from me, there is actually 3 blocks over, there's a yard. They must have 30 blow-ups in the yard. I mean, you can't even see the house. Most of them are 20 feet tall. I mean, it's this enormous sea of blow-ups are there. I'm thinking, what is what is the world coming to? That's my thought, right? So maybe you're that way also. Change is hard. And for the world to change, it's hard. However, this is what I want to throw at you. Change is constant. It always occurs. No matter what you think as far as holding on and keeping things the way they are, they will not stay the way they are. It constantly reinvents itself, comes up with new ideas, it expresses itself, and the world constantly changes. And I would tell you, I think that's because that's the way God made the world, to change. And when God brings change in, it is absolutely consistent with his nature that God is moving forward, that he's going to take us to a better place, that he has better ideas than what we come up with, and the changes that God makes are lasting. And that's, one of the reasons I love Christmas, because here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still celebrating the change that occurred. At the end of this last year, there was a little bit of a storm. It wasn't a really big one or bad one, but my wife was flying in from out of the country, and because of the storm and because of lightning, they shut down the airport here at right below us in the Houston airport, and makes a mess. And as I go, it takes me about 35 minutes to go to the airport, pick her up. It took me an hour and a half to go. And as I pull out and I'm trying to get on 45 and then go on the toll road to go, it is just dead stopped. And I thought, oh my goodness, how bad a storm can it be? It's not even raining up here, but it must be so bad in Houston that you can't even get through. And then later I find out that wasn't the cause. For some reason, someone decided to stop on 45, take out a folding chair and sit in the middle. You remember that story, yes. And now you think, why would everybody stop? Okay, so they had a gun. But besides that, it was, but I thought it was the weather. So I get down to the airport. She calls me, she says, okay, they've diverted us to Dallas. We've landed in Dallas. The pilots are in there trying to work to be able to allow us, after we refuel, to go ahead and fly back to Houston. So just go on and go back home, and I'll call you. I said, I'm not going back home. I'm like, you don't understand how long it took me just to get here to the airport. That's the last thing I'm gonna do is try to do this again. So I got toward 59. I went to a Popeyes. My wife she didn't like me going to fast food, but I went to Popeyes because I'm killing time. I walk into Popeyes, here's change, right? I walk into Popeyes, I order, I say, do y'all, can I pay with Apple Pay, and because I love doing that, because you can do that and you don't actually have to give them any money, and so okay. So I go up there and I do it, and the girl behind the counter, she says, what is that? I'm like, what do you mean, what is that? It's an iPhone, it's a telephone. You've never seen it. I'm thinking, man, how sheltered these teenagers are this day. She said, no, what kind is that? I said, well, it's an iPhone. She said, no, what model? I said, well, it's an X. That's a 10, right? And she's yelling back to her coworkers, same age, they're going, you've got to come see this. We've never seen this before. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I really was. I was going like, what are you talking about? This is modern space age technology, just the future in my hand. You don't understand. And they're going like, oh, and they're looking at it. I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. And it is true. I hold on to things for a long time. If it works, why am I gonna change? I don't do that much with it. So, I make phone calls and I use Apple Pay. But so besides that, you just hold on to it. Because you say, I don't know why I wanna get a different one, because like I do, if I get a new iPhone, what are they gonna do? They're gonna change the way it works. Everything's gonna be different, and I'm gonna have to be in this big learning curve. All of my apps are gonna go dead or dormant. I'm gonna have to reload everything, re-sign in. I don't know my passwords, it's just way too much trouble to adjust to what? Change. Yeah, of course it is. Change is a difficult thing. I put this in your outline. You know what's really difficult? Radical change. Change is difficult, but radical change is really different. When they change the foundational things of life, unless. I want you to think about the unless. Unless there's someone leading you through the change, someone that maybe has a reason for making the change, that you have learned to what? Trust. I trust this person. I know that this person will help me. I know that they will lead me through this change. And this is what in the Bible, those who were called to follow Jesus, those who were called, in the Old Testament to believe and to follow God, this is what they had to learn, and it was a hard thing to learn. God can be trusted. And when God brings about a change, when he makes a change, it may throw you off. It threw the Jewish people off incredibly. It throws Rome off, who is the power in Jesus' day, because they have to figure out, and it takes them a couple of hundred years to figure out, how can we take this thing called Christianity then, since it's growing, it's moving, and work it into our advantage to somehow make it. Now, I know you're going to say, well, you're making a judgment. I am, because that's the way people are. That's what we tend to do. But God has his own plans. And God makes changes so that we can learn to trust him, and he's going to move it forward to a different place and really, honestly, to a better place. So one of my favorite characters in the Christmas story is actually a man named Herod. You've heard of Herod before. So Herod is actually the kind of ruler or overseer of Jerusalem and the area that the Romans would call Judea. And so he rules over this. In fact, Julius Caesar, nope, it wasn't even Julius Caesar, it was the Senate, made him the king of Judea. They actually proclaim him, the Roman Senate, as the king of Judea. And Herod is an ingenious man. He is the master of change, movement. He is ambitious. He is the kind of guy that we would read about in the magazines and we would hear newscasts talking about. This guy is going to make things happen. Unfortunately, as he gets older, he does what a lot of times ambitious people do, is he becomes more paranoid and he becomes more difficult to deal with. And at the end, the historians that write about him, Josephus and many of the Roman historians, pretty much think that he goes mad, he loses his mind, does some pretty crazy things, including has the baby boys killed down in Bethlehem. But Herod is ingenious. He was, you might not know who he is because there's kind of a gap in the Bible. So in churches, a lot of times there's a gap where you hear the Old Testament, then there's this 400-year gap. And everything that goes on in between that, you just don't hear much about. But there's a lot going on in the world, especially in this part of the world, because the Greeks have taken over, and then the Romans have conquered the Greeks, and then there's a Roman Senate, this idea that, man, we're going to be ruled by the people. And then this guy that I mentioned, Julius Caesar, he pops up and he proclaims himself Caesar or emperor. He decides to take over the power from the Senate. And all of a sudden, the ambitious ones, as always happens, the ambitious ones, they start finding a way to climb to the top, to places of power. That's the way the world works. Herod was one of those guys. His father was actually from Petra. You've heard of that before. It's down in Jordan now, but Petra is kind of a strange carved out city out of the side of the rock, but it's the home of the Nabateans. And the Nabateans, again, you wouldn't know much about them. The Nabateans are nomads, and so they wandered through the deserts, and they learned how to make a lot of money on trade because they were in the perfect spot, this part of the world, to seize the trade between Arabia and the Mediterranean Sea. And so Petra became the place for their building and in fact, what was often thought to be a place of worship in the side of the hills was actually part of their finance and their treasury and all too, because this is who they were. Well, Herod's father was from there. And Herod, they practiced Judaism, but he wasn't Jewish. So Herod does not inherit any kind of a line as being in the Jewish line, but he inherited from his father ambition, trying to make money, trying to be powerful. And Herod wanted to rule over the area of Judea, which is where Jerusalem is. I was listening to a guy this morning. He was saying that Judea in their day was the armpit of the world. Which sounds really good, right? So no one would want to live in Judea. It's not true. Judea was a very profitable place. It's just it was a mess because of the Romans, the Greeks, The Nabateans would constantly try to come back and take over and rule over it. And so the financial part of this area and the gain that you could have was incredible because of where it was located. Just a side note, Herod realizes this. He's masterful at getting people to build and do things for him. He builds a port on the sea, it's on the Mediterranean Sea, called Caesarea. And he names it after Caesar to try to endear himself to Caesar. And this is so remarkable because you could not build a port on that side of the Mediterranean. Sandy, the ocean, the way it crashes there, it just cannot be done. There are no natural ports, but it would be a gold mine, Herod realizes, if you could build a port city there. Because if you wanted to transport things from Arabia and you wanted to come from China, India, and you wanted to get all the way over into the European area of the country, you don't want to go by land. Once you got to the sea, you want to get on a boat, a ship. The only way you could do it is you had to go south and go down into Egypt and go to Alexandria to load a ship. So if you could build a port on that shore, and he did it by using concrete that could harden in the water. It's gone now because eventually the sea reclaimed it. But he made a lot of money, a fortune for the Empire of Rome and for himself. He also built Masada. You've heard of that before, right? It's funny because you look at Masada, they want to talk about it was this fortress so that he could protect himself. That's not why he built it. This is a spa. This is an old fortress on the top of a peak overlooking the Dead Sea, and he turned it into a luxury place where he could go away, get away. He built a spa on a lower level overseeing the Dead Sea, and it was just a way for him to get away. You've heard of Jericho, right? The city of Jericho. Jericho had turned into, by this time, another luxury spa for the rich in their day. In fact, Herod, actually, while he was at Jericho, the luxury spa, he ran into an Egyptian lady who became Pharaoh named Cleopatra. They met, and the historians write that Cleopatra actually tried to seduce Herod. She was attracted. He's ambitious. He wants to do something. He's going to make things happen. Never worked out, which was probably a good thing for Herod because Herod had a good friend, a really good friend named Mark Antony. And Mark Antony and Cleopatra hook up after the death of Julius Caesar. And there's a war between Mark Antony and a guy named Octavian, who ends up being the adopted nephew of Julius Caesar. They fight, and who wins? Anybody know? Octavian or Mark Antony? Octavian wins, yes. So Herod has backed the wrong guy. In fact, not only did Herod back the wrong guy while the war is going on, Herod was still in Jerusalem trying to defend his territory and fight, and he should have been there in the battle fighting for his friend, Mark Antony, and so he knows it's a bad mistake. Now he's in real trouble because Octavian has taken over. All those who supported Mark Antony are going to be wiped out. They're going to be gone. He flees down to Alexandria, and then he makes a bold move. He's brilliant. He gets on a ship. He goes to Rome. He comes into Rome not as a ruler, a king in the area. He comes in humble with nothing. And he goes to Octavian, and he's honest, because smart men know when to use honesty. And so he goes in, and he says, look, you're right. I supported Mark Antony. He was my friend. I believe in loyalty. I was loyal to him even, until his death. And so I admit it, and I submit myself to you, if that offends you. But if you will have me, I will be just as loyal to you as I was to Mark Antony. And Herod is good. I mean, he makes the appeal. You see all of the things he has accomplished, the things that he has done. And what do you think happens? Octavian says, okay, you're forgiven. Now you work for me. And it works. He gets sent back, and he is now the ruler. When Jesus comes along in what we call Judea, or especially in Jerusalem. Another little fact. I know you think you got too many historical facts. Just one more before you get into this. Just one more. You'll really like this. I told you that Herod is the one who expanded the temple in Jerusalem. Part of it is because he was trying to appease the Jews because he had no Jewish bloodline. He could not be the king of the Jews for them, even if the Roman Senate proclaimed him the king of the Jews. but also because he was into profit. And the enormous footprint of the Temple Mount is not just a place of worship for him, it's a place for commerce and for business, so that Jerusalem will be the hub of all the business coming from Arabia toward the sea and from the sea back. He is brilliant about how he does this. In fact, at one point, he even goes and he puts a Roman eagle in the temple on the side of the wall just to show this is also Roman territory. It infuriates a lot of Jews. They tear it down, and he goes in and has them all killed that did that. But he's making all sorts of moves because of Rome and because he wants this territory. And just to let you know, if you read the story of Jesus, as Jesus is doing his ministry, one of the things you will notice is that Jesus, when he goes into the temple, when he starts his ministry, what does he do in the temple? Forms a whip, right? Overturns the what? The tables of the money changers, and he drives out all of the goods, everything being sold in the Temple Mount, because it had become an enormous place of commerce. I know people think that that's because, and I've heard somebody say, because churches ask for money. God does not. No, that's not what it was. Jesus had no problem with the temple tax and things like that. It was because this had been turned into a place of business, an enormous place of business by Herod. Herod's gone now, that Herod is. But he goes in and he says, it wasn't supposed to be this way. This was supposed to be about a relationship to God and the one who ruled over us, and a place of prayer to coming to him. Because that was the way God had set it up, sending his son into the world, into the midst of this change, into the midst of the turmoil that they were experiencing, and in the midst of this ruler named Herod. So Matthew, he records the story of Herod and the coming of we call them the three, but we don't know how many of the three what? The wise men. So here's what it says. I know you thought that was just the introduction. This will go fast. Let me just read for you. But I think this is a great part of the story that Matthew records. In chapter 2 of Matthew, it says in verse 1, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of who? Yeah, and so this Herod gives us an idea of the time and all. It substantiates who Jesus is. This is at the end of Herod's life, not at the beginning. He's probably in his 60s by this time. He'll die before he's 70, I think. It says, about this time, some wise men from eastern lands arrive in Jerusalem. So these are foreigners, other foreigners who come from what I talked about, Arabia, from the east. And these magi, that is actually the word that's used. 3 times Matthew uses the word magi. We translate it in modern wise men, but they were astrologers. They were at some list them as kingmakers, because you needed their approval in the eastern lands to be able to rise to power. They come journeying to Jerusalem, but listen to what it says. Here's what they're asking. Where is the newborn, say it with me, the newborn what? How do you think this makes Herod feel? He can't be king of the Jews. I mean, he is. The Romans have declared him king of the Jews. The Jews don't consider him king of the Jews. You're not Jewish, and so he has no heritage to substantiate himself this way. Herod married, his first wife was named Doris, and Doris had a son, and he adored this son. But she wasn't Jewish, and she could not help him. So Herod, as much as he loved her and loved his son, he banished them to the east, to Arabia, sent them off. He married a Jewish princess because he needed that's just his ambition and the price that Herod was willing to pay to get what he wanted and the power that he wanted. This wife didn't do very well either, because eventually he had her executed. He had the 2 sons by her drowned. In fact, Octavian, now known as Augustus Caesar, would write, according to Roman historians, they would write that he once said, it was better to be Herod's pig than one of his sons. Right, because he had this reputation for eliminating anyone that he thought was a danger to him. So they're asking, dangerous ask, where's the one born to be king of the Jews? They say, we saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this. as was everyone in Jerusalem. Right, because when Herod became disturbed, what happened? Heads usually rolled. I mean, it didn't turn out well because Herod didn't deal with it in any kind of, reasonable or patient or kind way. Herod was ambitious and ruthless and cruel because of that. He says, as everyone in Jerusalem, he said he called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law, and he asked, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? In Bethlehem in Judea, they said, for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, it's another name for Judea. Judea is the Roman name, Judah is the Hebrew name. You're not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you, and he will be the shepherd for my people, who? Israel. So it's a different ruler, it's a different king. This is something Herod cannot be, and the truth is, Herod didn't care to be that way. Herod saw power and who he wanted to be as wrapped up in armies and in wealth and in commerce. And Jesus comes as a different ruler into the world, a different king. It says in verse 7, then Herod called a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Then he told them, go to Bethlehem, search carefully for the child. When you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and that I can worship him too. We don't know what the wise men thought of this request. Don't know if they believed him, if they thought it was a good idea. But here's what we probably can't assume. If they talk to anyone else in Jerusalem and they say, this is what King Herod said, what would they tell them? What do you think? Don't believe a word he says, right? He's not interested in worshiping any king born in Judah. He is interested in his own power and his own control, so you don't want to believe him. So don't know if they count this yet, but they would. It says in verse number 9, after this interview, the wise men, they went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It's about 5 or 6 miles south of Jerusalem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with what? See, they're looking for something different. Would they have been used to powers and rulers and armies? Absolutely. But for some reason, in the east, wherever they were from, they were looking for something else, something foretold in the heavens is how they would have looked at it and understood it. And they had been led to this place. They don't know exactly where to go. In fact, some historians, I think it seems this way, that as they come to Jerusalem into this area, they seem to have lost the star somehow. And so they're asking where he's to be born. And then when they leave going to Bethlehem, the star seems to reappear to them and to guide them onto this place. So they're looking for a different type of king, a different type of ruler, which maybe, you would say, well, that's what I'm looking for. I understand the way the world works. I understand how commerce and power and armies work, but I'm looking for a different kind of king. Well, so were they. It says then in the next verse, in verse 10, when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house. They saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These gifts very reflective of being from the east, and certainly, have some pictures, representations of who Jesus would be. As you can tell from the story, from the narrative, this is not Jesus in the manger. This is Jesus as after he's born. Even the word used here in the Greek is a word for a small child, not for a baby. And they go to the house where they find him. So this is after the birth of Jesus as they are coming to look for him. And it says in verse number 12, when it was time to leave. So, everybody wears out their welcome, right? You've been told that before? It's time to go, right? Okay, it's time to go. They return to their own country, but they go by another route. I've always loved that verse. I remember when I was young, the first time I ever heard somebody say this. Once you meet Jesus, once you see God's promise, once once you grasp what God is up to, the changes that God wants to bring into the world and the changes that God wants to bring into our life, I know this is spiritualizing to some extent. You don't leave the same way that you came. You're different. You see things different. Your expectations are different. Even maybe your understanding of power, of worthiness, of who you should worship with your life changes because of how you see things. They come and they find a small child living in a house, maybe in a room of relatives of Mary and Joseph. They are led there. They sense this as a divine leading in their life as they come. Those who are overseers of the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, the foretelling of the coming of a Messiah, have told him, this is where you will find that Messiah. They go to this place, and there is the child. And as they leave to go back, they're different. They can't go back the same way that they came. It says, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. So God continues to lead Mary and Joseph. This is the rest of the story that sometimes we stop there, but here's what it says, verse 13. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. This is one of 3 dreams that Joseph is going to have. He says, get up, flee to Egypt, and with the child and his mother, the angel said, stay until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother. And they stayed there until Herod's death. They fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, I called my son out of Egypt. Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. Herod's brutal action fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A cry was heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeps for her children, refusing to be comforted, for they are dead. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Get up, the angel said. Take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who were trying to kill the child are dead. So he leaves Egypt. He's headed back. He's going east, and as he's going back, it also says in verse 21, so Joseph got up. He returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and his mother. And when he learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son, Archelaus, he was afraid to go there. And incidentally, in the Bible, there are 5, maybe 6 Herods in the Bible. This is Herod the Great, the original. He is dead. His sons will also be called Herod. You will see in the book of Acts, Agrippa, and different ones who are also Herods. They're relatives. They rule in the same area that he did. So he's warned about this in a dream. He left the region of Galilee, afraid to go there. Then after being warned, so the family went and lived in a town called, so he goes back to where he's from, town called what? Nazareth. Now it just kind of fits together, doesn't it? So he's born in Bethlehem. He goes down to Jerusalem. There are prophecies that say he will be called out of Egypt, yes, and then that is fulfilled. And now he goes up to Nazareth. This fulfills what the prophecies said. He will be called a what? A Nazarene. And we know this is true. In fact, I love it in the scriptures where one of the disciples, when he's called to come follow Jesus, his friend comes and says, hey, I think we found the one. He said, it's Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, can anything good come out of what? But that's what he was called, because that's where he lived, and that's where they lived, in Nazareth. And of course, Jesus does his ministry up even further in the land of Galilee in Capernaum. So all of it fits together. I don't know where you are or how you think of Jesus or God's plans, but that's actually the way it works. As you go through changes and as you go through shifting things in your life and you're trying to figure out what's going on, you're looking for answers, you're looking for someone who cares, who can guide you through those things, it has to be fitted together. You have to see the different pieces. It's not just as easy as saying this one thing will be my answer, is this one thing. You see God at work throughout life, throughout time, throughout history. God's ability to use Egyptian empires, Roman empires, Greek empires, Babylonian empires. I mean, because God is bigger than those things. He cares more than those things. This is why Jesus called for, his disciples called for a trust in Jesus, a trust in the living God who watches after us and cares for us as we go through life. That's Christmas. God had not forgotten. God had plans. God foretold of his plans. When Jesus comes, the pieces start to fit together. Now, there are more pieces still to go, just to let you know, yeah. But they start to fit together so that we can see them, even though we see other things that we struggle with, we can see the pieces beginning to fit together, that God has sent a Savior into the world to rescue us from the world and even from ourselves, even from our own sin. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you do care for us. You do have plans. And so many times we get lost trying to find those plans, trying to figure out what our next step is as we go through life and we live our lives. And sometimes, like those in Jesus' day, we wonder, God, do you really care? Are you really there? Are there plans for me? Are there plans for my future? Is there a place where I fit in? And then especially at this time when we celebrate and we see who Jesus himself is, how he came, what he did, how it fit, how the pieces fall into place. It helps get our attention that you do care, that he did come to give his life to rescue us and to change our understanding of who you are, what you can do, who the people around me are in their need also. If you're here and you've never put your trust in the gift that God gave, in the one that God promised, that he foretold, in a child that was born in a lowly manger in Bethlehem, in what many people would consider just a no place, insignificant, but he was born in a way that we could understand that he, God himself, the Son of God, Jesus, he knows us. He knows our needs. He knows what we feel, what we go through. And he came in such a way so that we could understand that he is not just some ruler lifted up, living in a different world than we live in, but he understands us and he cares about us. And he wants to come to lead us and to guide us through life. So you can say, Lord Jesus, thank you. Thank you for coming into this world, being born in such a way that I could understand, I could know you. I pray you would forgive me of my sins, my struggles, my difficulties, but that you would also lead me and guide me and show me your way, the better way, so that I could live with hope and confidence that you do care, and know that you are with me in everything that I go through. As I pray in Jesus' name, amen.